Mitochondria are like little microscopic power plants. But if your metabolism is impaired, you're going to lack the ability to do something that is good for you. You want to improve your mitochondrial function? Exercise.
Makes sense.
This is your boy, Dr. J.C. Dornick, aka The Dragon, and welcome to an impromptu from a hotel in Chicago live stream of the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. We're going to talk about an interesting topic today that sometimes flies under the radar, but today we're going to take a different approach, which is very Make Sense podcast-ish. So if you're struggling with something like brain fog or mood swings, or maybe even a lack of focus, I think we all resonate with that. The root cause, this is what we're going to entertain today. We're gonna look at alternative vantage points and perspectives. That's what we're all about. So if you have brain fog, mood swings, or maybe a lack of focus, the root cause keyword might not be a mental thing or only a mental thing. It actually might be, to the topic today, metabolic. So we're going to talk about nutrition and your metabolic health, but how it affects your brain, exercise as well. So in this episode, we're going to dive into something called metabolic psychiatry, and more importantly, how insulin resistance and mitochondrial health, we're going to geek out a little bit on that, dictates your emotional stability and your cognitive edge. The word cognition is really important for people to grasp right now because we're kind of offloading our cognition to technology right now, which is not necessarily a good thing. There's a right way and a wrong way to do it. But cognitive edge, to have a cognitive edge would mean that your brain is in support of you doing better at perceiving and responding versus reacting, handling adversity and stuff like that. So if somebody comes at me or comes at you and you handle it well and you run it through the interface response system. If you guys get my book and you read it, you actually read it, and you come to the free masterminds that I do, it's going to change your life. It's going to arm and equip you with a new way of looking at things. But that would give you a cognitive edge. So we're going to learn the framework also of something that we call metabolic synchronization. That's a good thing. And what that is that's going to be something that aligns your blood sugar, your lean muscle mass, your brain energy for total life control. What a cool concept. So we're going to explore things like the ketogenic concept, not just ketogenic diets, because I don't really like the word diet, but we're going to look at ketogenic therapies, I guess we could say, for psychiatric outcomes. We're gonna reference things from Dr. Wendy Suzuki. These are just the leading experts. Gabrielle Lyons, Dr. Peter Attia, who wrote the book Outlived. So today we're going to dive into this emerging field of what I call metabolic psychiatry. I'm not the only one that calls it that. I didn't come up with it. I found it. And why your brain energy metabolism. So your brain has a metabolism as well, right? Your brain energy metabolism might be the hidden thermostat controlling things like focus, mood, and emotional stability. So just park for a second there and realize that if you're experiencing any issues with your moods, mood swings, things like that, your focus or your emotional stability, emotional intelligence. If you're somebody that is like most people and you're experiencing emotional mismanagement, we're going to talk about some things that you can do to arm and equip and give that cognitive edge to your brain, to that wet piece of meat in your skull. So why this topic is so interesting to me and I think is so relevant for the show, because if we don't talk about this topic, you might just get an idea and know something, but not really be able to execute on it because you're skipping a step. And that would be this metabolic psychiatry component. So this is often overlooked, this concept of our metabolic health, but more importantly, how it plays a huge role in who you are, right? When we say who I am, sometimes we only think mentally or what my identity is, but there's also the body, there's the physical, right? There's muscle, there's organs, there's fluids, there's chemistry, and all of that stuff. That stuff has a lot to do with who you are, right? And how well what you do works, right? It's a simple way to look at that is if you just start a new eating program or going to the gym, right? You're not the right person for the job yet. You will be, but we have to evolve sometimes. So for those of you that don't know, because I very often just come across as the podcast guy, the dragon guy, but I've spent the past 20 years of my life coaching as a metabolic health coach. So I've been coaching in the realm of metabolic health. So, am I an expert? No, but I've got a lot of experience, right? I also lost 80 pounds. As I have my own health journey. I lost 80 pounds 20 years ago and kept it off. And I've learned a lot. But that's not the only thing that I find interesting about this concept of metabolic psychiatry, the correlation between nutrition, exercise, and the brain. One thing that I can tell you happened when I went through my health transformation and I gained mental clarity. I never knew that by losing weight and eating healthy and establishing some healthy habits that I would see things clearer. I would handle adversity better. And that was a big part of me reclaiming control of my life, right? Because I started to recognize that there's very few things in life that we control, right? But what we put in our mouths and what we drink and what comes out of our mouths and our response is fully in our control. So we have to become control freaks. We have to start learning how to control the controllables on all aspects. So one of the things that we teach in the interface response system in phase 3 called process is we just make a simple evaluation of the dichotomy of control. It's a Stoic principle. What is in my control and what is not? We should always look to allow ourselves to release from things that are not in our control. So this is a very, very fascinating thing for me because I was very, very much aware that my brain got clearer as a result of me getting healthy and eating healthy and losing weight. So let's make sense of this. So for years, I said this before, we've kind of treated the brain and the body as separate systems. So mental health over here. So we've got mental health, right? We go get treated for mental health and we address mental health. And then there's metabolic or physical health over here, right? We kind of like quarantine them as separate things. And we know that they're connected, but we address them separately. But the science is beginning to tell us a very different story about that stuff. So this emerging field, you've heard it many times now, of metabolic psychiatry suggests this. Many mental disorders, such as things like depression, had it, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and even ADHD, these are very popular, disorders, may, keyword may, also involve in impaired brain energy metabolism. So what we're saying here is if your brain's metabolic health is off, very often that's correlated with some of those proliferations of those symptoms that we just talked about. So we're not here to diagnose, we're not here to prove anything. We're just here to simply look at something that could play a big, big role, at least in the severity of some of those things. But if you don't have or struggle with any of those things, you definitely have mood swings every now and then. You definitely get happy and sad and all of that stuff. So this will help that, because if your mood swings are affecting your response system, well, this stuff is pretty important, isn't it? So in other words, your brain might not be flawed or broken. It might not be flawed or broken. It might just be underpowered and undernourished. So we're going to talk about nourishing your brain. There's brain food out there, but there's also some healthy habits that we could build. So one term that researchers use, and there's going to be some terms here, and you can either write them down or not, but obviously they'll come out in the transcriptions and stuff like that. But there's one term used called cerebral glucose hypometabolism. And it means this: the brain isn't effectively using glucose, which is a primary component of a lot of the stuff that we eat. It's not using glucose efficiently as fuel, right? So that's cerebral glucose hypometabolism. Your brain's metabolism is hypo. It's not doing it efficiently. And there's something that we really need to understand about the way that the brain and the body works. If your brain cannot efficiently convert food and fuel, or we call it fuel, but convert what you eat into what's called ATP. Does anybody know what ATP is? It stands for adenosine triphosphate, which is the primary energy currency of all living cells. So if you don't have an ATP production, right? That's what we're talking about here, or you have a decrease or a limited amount of ATP production, then you're going to be struggling. You're going to be struggling with all of the cells in your body that are so essential. So ATP is the primary energy currency of all living cells, which transports chemical energy within cells for things like metabolism, muscle contraction. We all need this, right? You might overlook this and say, oh, my body will take care of that. But remember, if you're missing a couple of steps, your body's only taking care of it to the degree it can. And how does this affect everything we talk about on this show? Who you are determines how well what you do works. We're talking about you. We're talking about the who right now. So this transports chemical energy within cells for metabolism, muscle contraction, and signaling, right? Your emotional stability, things like that. Your focus, your executive function begins to degrade if you have a decreased production of ATP. That's all you got to know. Okay. So that's not philosophy, by the way. That's like science and energy physics right there. That's not something that's hypothetical. This is real. This is real stuff. So let me be clear about something. I'm not a psychiatrist by no means, right? I'm not diagnosing anyone here. I'm actually a doctor of chiropractic and a coach, and I have a degree in nutrition and 20 years as a metabolic health coach. So I've got a lot of say and experience in this. I'm a geek about neuroscience. I'm a neuroscience student. I'm working towards getting a degree in that. But by no means am I an expert, right? I'm just super fascinated by human behavior and specifically behavioral shifts in myself and in others that I'm looking to help through my book and the ecosystem. I've experienced and I've seen behavioral shifts and I've witnessed, what happens to them, like I said before, when my metabolism improves. So what I'm saying right now is if you guys go on a run to improve your metabolic health right now, a lot of the things that you think you have problems with will get better. And it's not a hypothetical. It will actually happen. So a lot of people are thinking about eating healthier or losing weight, and that's a physical thing. I just want you to recognize that it plays a huge role, and there's science and peer-reviewed stuff at the wazoo to prove that. So let's just talk a little bit about the chemistry. We're going to talk about insulin resistance and mental health right now. How important is this? Well, it might be important to you. It's very, very important, but some people might just block this out. But I just want to make sure it's in here. When insulin signaling is impaired, what's insulin signaling, right? It's the body signaling the need for insulin, right? And regulation of insulin. But when it's impaired, inflammation rises. So a lot of people struggle with inflammation, right? Mitochondrial efficiency drops. We're going to talk about mitochondria today. This is a very, very big word in metabolic health and metabolic synchronization and stuff like this. This is going on in your body, and it has a lot to do with why you see certain people age faster than others. Their stem cells and their mitochondrial function is starting to go dormant faster because of what we're talking about today. So you can take back control of that stuff. But when insulin signaling is impaired, inflammation rises, mitochondrial efficiency drops, and blood sugar swings become more dramatic. And guess what suffers first when those things happen? When insulin signaling is impaired, right? The brain. The brain suffers first. So a lot of people out there are experiencing metabolic dysfunction, but not in a physical way. They're getting mood swings. They're getting cognitive fatigue. They're getting low motivation, irritability, and anxiety spikes. I remember when I was 80 pounds overweight, I had a lot more anxiety. Think about this. What if some cases of depression, I've struggled quite a bit with depression, and I know a lot of people do. What if some cases of depression aren't just serotonin problems, and we learn a lot about that in the world of depression? What if they're energy problems? What if there's something more simple in that mix that we actually have control over? What if it's also about energy? Some of them, of course, could be like this. Some of them could be, diagnosed in a different way. But that's what metabolic psychiatry is asking and talking about. It's about using the component of things like exercise and hydration and nutrition to fuel the brain. And very often, what we see as a side effect, we can't make this claim, but I can promise you, if you get healthy and you start working on your metabolic health, it's going to help. It might not cure something, but it's going to be better. Right. So if you're into chasing better in life and living longer and having a better quality of life, this is a foolproof way to do that. And interventions like ketogenic diets, there's that diet word again, for things like bipolar disorder, that's being studied right now. So people with bipolar disorder, right? The research is now showing that people that are getting ketones or producing ketones from things like a ketogenic diet, and there's so many different ones, that's being studied now, not just for weight loss, right? But as an alternative fuel efficiency therapy for the brain. Think about that. So ketones actually provide a more stable, efficient energy substrate for the brain when glucose metabolism is impaired. Okay, so ketones may provide a more stable efficiency energy substrate for the brain when glucose metabolism is impaired. So, what we're saying there, and I don't know if it came out the right way, but if your metabolism is impaired, you're going to lack the ability to do something that is good for you. So, let's talk about mitochondrial health and your mood. So, every thought that you have in your brain, a lot of people don't know this. Every thought that you have in your brain requires that ATP, that adenosine triphosphate, right? And where does that come from? The mitochondria. I'm going to just explain really simply what mitochondria is, because a lot of people are not taking care of their mitochondria. So we're saying that every thought that you have requires ATP production, and that's coming from the mitochondria. So real simple, mitochondria are just tiny little structures inside nearly all of the cells in your body. And there's like gazillions of cells in your body. And these little mitochondria act as microscopic power plants. It's like soil that produces more cells, cell proliferation, right? So mitochondria are like little microscopic power plants. They take the food that we eat. That's how we fuel them, by the way, right? It takes the food that we eat and the oxygen that we breathe, and it converts them into usable ATP. That's that ATP. What is ATP important for? Thinking, right? And all of that stuff. ATP is like essential. So we're just looking at, maybe I'm not fat, right? Maybe my issue is that I don't have efficient ATP production, right? So it comes from the food we eat and the oxygen, and it produces usable ATP, which ends up fueling everything that your body does. Everything. So if you're crashing at the end of the day or you're having mood swings, it could be an ATP issue, right? Probably is to a certain or a large degree. So everything that your body does, from thinking to moving to repairing and creating new cells. A lot of people struggle with how fast they bounce back from getting sick or even from an injury. ATP production, right? That's all about the cells that are required for all of those functions. If it's not efficient, you're going to take longer than other people. We saw this happen in COVID, by the way. So I'm not here to make big statements and get people all pissed off. What I'm here to say is this is something that you can change, and it is a game changer. You will have a much better life experience if you play with this. So let's zoom out for a second. We got a little bit hardcore with the science there. What improves mitochondrial function? And I just want you to see that these are things that are 100% in your control. You want to improve your mitochondrial function? Exercise. Okay. Muscle building, specifically lean muscle mass, and also muscle sustaining. So, one of the greatest breakthroughs that ever happened with weight loss, but it's a double-edged sword, is all this GLP stuff. It's shutting off the food noise. It doesn't cause weight loss, but it's helping people not eat so much, right? But what's the downside of it? They're getting muscle wasting, right? They're getting sarcopenia. So, muscle building, specifically lean muscle mass, is producing right? Mitochondria, it's improving mitochondrial function. So what's happening to people that are having muscle wasting because they're just losing weight and they're not doing anything about it, nourishing, their mitochondria is going down. That's a big problem. So you're going to see in correlation with people doing those drugs the wrong way, you're going to see increased things like increased dementia and Alzheimer's because not because of the drugs, because of the things that they're not doing. Because if you do this right, if you're taking those meds, but you do it right, you're exercising, you're building lean muscle mass, and you're nourishing your body the right way, rather than just saying, hey, I don't want to eat anymore, so I'm just going to have a cheeseburger and that's it. Also, stable blood sugar, sleep, reduced inflammation, these things improve mitochondrial function. Do you give a shit about this? Right? I hope you do. I hope you do, because it's very rare that we have elements that can improve our lives that we are in control of. Most of the things in life we're not in control of. Shit happens, right? But how we respond to the shit happening and what we put in our mouth, how we move our body, all of that stuff. It's not easy, right? Gets easier, but this is all about improving mitochondrial function. So you're starting to see the pattern. So that's all I have for you today. Remember, if you learned something today, give it away. That's how it's going to stay. So love and appreciate you. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. And I'm going to get back to being in a hotel.
Makes sense.